Everything you need to know about the Flood. Only I know is it's from Halo, and they are some kind of hive mind.
The Flood. Throughout the entirety of
Gorgeous.
fiction, there are very few monsters, zombies, entities, ideas, concepts that are more terrifying than the Flood, whatever way you would really want to describe them, because I've been playing Halo.
What about the Necromorphs from Dead Space? Those. I know the lore behind the Brother Moons, they're kind of like a hive mind, but they don't become a hive mind until there's enough Necromorphs. Would that be? I guess we'll find out in this video.
Halo campaign evolved, and I'm gonna be real here, bro. I have been diving headfirst into some Flood lore and absolutely loving every single millisecond of it. And I'm gonna be honest with you, bro. It is so much worse than I thought it
Ooh,
was.
disturbing
I've been
lore.
talking about the Flood on this channel
My
ever
favorite
since
kind
the
of lore.
beginning. Like real time. I think one of the first videos I ever made on the channel was like a video game apocalypses I would survive, and I do believe I talked about the Flood in that video. And in this video, this will be my magnum opus dedicated to the Flood from
I
Halo,
guess this way I can
where we
fix
are going to
that.
be going
Ethan, buddy, it's fine because I can see the reflection of your screen in the background.
over their infection forms, their origin, and a few theories on where do I think they are now, and that is going to be today's video. If you enjoy this, these more explainy type of content where I just go over like one thing and like really, like we're going pedal to the metal with it, and we're actually doing some research with some better editing and everything. Show me some love in
I
the
love
comment
this new
section
setup.
down below.
Nice.
Like it up, comment it up for anything else that you would like me to cover, and I will do so. And with all that out of the way, let's get into the explained video of the Flood.
The precursors. Is this like the god of the Halo universe? I don't know a lot of
In
Halo
order to
lore.
get to the origin of the Flood, we first got to go back, I don't know, like to the origin of life within the Milky Way Galaxy, which traces back a couple million years. We go all the way back then. We go to these ancient entities in.
I'm gonna fact check that. That doesn't sound right. I feel like it's gonna be billion. I don't know Halo lore, but that just don't sound right. Yeah, they're over 10 billion years old. And it existed before the current iteration of the universe. And they arrived at the Milky Way Galaxy around 4.8 billion years ago. Not million. Not two. You're wrong!
Inside of the Haloverse, otherwise known as the Precursors. Now, the Precursors are fairly mysterious.
Okay, that
they are
sounds
basically
sick.
known as the masters of the known galaxy, mastering everything from like quantum neuroscience, where they can essentially like do what would be in like Warhammer and like using their minds to sape reality. So basically the warp. That's going to come into a really terrifying conclusion later on in the video, to creating alien life and safe.
We're gonna take that back. These guys are worse than the Necromorphs. I know the Necromorphs and the Brother Moons come from a different dimension. These guys sound like they do too. And the Necromorphs, like, it's called Dead Space because they've killed. Well, there only is one other planet that I know of that's had Necromorphs on it. Taldace? I can't remember the name. And they're gone. Humans are left populating our different planets. I'm gonna say the Flood's worse just because of the fact they're able to basically have reality manipulation.
Their own bodies into any form that they really do please. And again, that is going to come in handy very, very terrifyingly later on in the video. The Precursors created, again, just about every piece of alien life within the known Milky Way Galaxy. Everything from the Sangheli to the Brutes to the race that would later be known as the Prophets, to the two main contenders that really are important in this segment is the Forerunners and ancient humanity. Sorry, bro. Humanity's supremacy every single time. You see, the Precursors wanted, and their one true goal for the entirety.
Now, if we make it to the links they did, sure, humanity number one. Now, if we use their technology to advance ourselves, granted we understand their technology, but they also probably explain it to us. Oh no, I guess we have the capability of understanding it, even if they do teach it to us. That means we have the capability of getting to it at some point. Whatever. Human superiority. Fuck all the aliens.
Of life in the galaxy was that it continued to go on. They wanted the continued existence of this little weird phenomenon that we call life. Because where they come from, and I have to bring this part up for a theory that I'm gonna bring up later on in the video. They don't come from the Milky Way Galaxy. They originated
Spoilers.
in
My bad.
another galaxy, which is gonna be super scary the later on we go on. But I gotta keep it together before I go into theory mode and straight up yap about it. But the precursors wanted, and their only goal was to make sure that life lived on throughout the Milky Way galaxy and didn't wipe itself out. So they created this thing called the Mantle of Responsibility. The Mantle of Responsibility was basically, hey, we as
It's like, hey, we're the big brothers of the universe. We're trying to make sure shit doesn't go sideways.
God Space Daddy, otherwise known as the Old Ones from Warhammer 40k, and dog, there are so many similarities to Halo lore and Warhammer that it is absolutely insane. The Old Ones created this thing called the Mantle of Responsibility that they were going to give to their most dominant and responsible creation. The two main contenders in this was the Forerunners, because they were, again, the most dominant and most advanced of all their creation, and ancient humanity. The Forerunners took up the Mantle of Responsibility, and using this as basically as a casus bell to basically look at every other form of life, like, listen, I understand you're really cool and all, but Space Daddy favors us the most. If I had a nickel for every single time an alien used that as a casus bell in order to dominate all other alien life within Halo lore, I would have 2 nickels. And that's funny that it happened twice. And there's a lot of repeats in the precursor era and the modern era of the Human Covenant War. But again, we're gonna get there. So the Forerunners did everything that they wanted to do with the Mantle of Responsibility, and the Precursors weren't really down with that. The Precursors were not a fan of everything that the Forerunners were doing. So the Forerunners essentially stepped in and were like, hey, we might take away your Mantle of Responsibility and give it to your little brother, the ancient humanity. The Forerunners did not take this well at all. And to
No,
give
why
them
would they?
some level of like respect.
Oh, wait. Why would they? They're the. I know just because you've lived longer, your society's been there longer doesn't mean you know best, but they're from a different fucking universe. They've lived for millions of years. Granted, I know they probably don't individually live for millions of years. I know they said they can kind of well, no, I guess with reality manipulation, maybe they do live forever. I don't know on that part. Maybe they'll explain that. Maybe I missed that.
Here, like they like to add some nuance here. The Precursors also wiped out other alien life that they deemed as a threat to other alien life that went against their goal of preserving everything that has to do with conscious organic life in the galaxy. So
I would know you need to know the reasons behind that. I would need to know they said to protect conscious life, but they're also probably taking out conscious life that has more violent tendencies. Just because they have violent tendencies then doesn't mean they're gonna have violent tendencies later. Why didn't they just kind of try and help instead of just eradicate? Explain, Ethan.
the Forerunners decided the best defense and offense and decided to say, no, Dad, I'm gonna beat you this time. And then, boom, that's how we get into the Forerunner Precursor War.
War!
The Forerunner Precursor conflict is one of those things that we don't know the exact scale of it, and a lot of it is left up to ambiguity, but we do know how it ended. The Forerunners ran a fade with the Precursors, and the Precursors were, to say the least, bro, they weren't really built for the struggle, bro. They weren't really built for the war. A lot of them either preferred not to fight the Forerunners at all, or to just straight up leave. They were kind of like, you know what? I ain't really down for this. You guys are kind of more or less proving the point that you are not responsible enough for the Mantle of Responsibility, but we don't really want to straight up decimate you, which kind of is like, dude, if you just got rid of the Forerunners, we low-key would never have been in this position, which I'm also gonna kind of blame the Precursors for the origin of the Flood, along with the...
Yeah, that's 100% on the Precursors. Why would they take out other alien species that were quote-unquote violent and a threat to sentient life? Yet the Forerunners are the same thing, kind of. They're just wanting to take over their mantle. But you could see, and you said, that they're not thinking the same way as you, and they're not going to protect it the same way as you. Granted, it doesn't mean it's bad, but we already know what happens. The Flood gets developed because of this. So it was bad. I, it's funny, the precursors were smart forever until that one incident. That or they just got tired. They could just have been tired of being the big brothers of the universe.
Forerunners, and don't worry, I'm gonna blame humanity like within the next couple of minutes because
Ah,
of their role that they had to play in creating the flood. But the precursors
lovely.
really, with technology that was so advanced that the best way that it could be described is as magic, they really could have wiped out the Forerunners, but they basically were
Yeah,
like, hey,
yeah.
we're going to allow
By the
ourselves to
sounds of
be
it.
destroyed. We're either going to leave the galaxy or we're going to safe sift into this powder. The powder has got to be one of those things that it's like, that's how it started? What do you mean that's how it started, dog? So the precursors decided, you know what, we're going to safe sift into some powder because, again, remember, the precursors have the ability to change their shape into anything they really see fit. So they decide, we're going to turn ourselves into a form of stardust or inert molecules, and then we're going to put ourselves onto spaceships, and we're going to send ourselves outside of the Milky Way Galaxy to... Theory time, I think they sent themselves back to the galaxy that they originated from. That's what I think. Whether that's Andromeda or any other galaxy that's even remotely near us is still, like, we don't know. But the Forerunners decided, you know,
I can see that. That's a good theory. I don't know enough about the lore to probably craft my own, but it could also just be looking for other universes to inhabit and maybe restart their Big Brother plan just in a different universe because this one backfired. It does just sound like they kind of got tired. They just kind of got tired of doing everything, at least there. It got boring.
what, we have the mantle of responsibility. We beat Space Daddy, and we are the official
Space
holder
Daddy.
of the mantle of responsibility. And our space dad was wrong about us. So basically, the entirety of the Flood origin story up to this point is basically the Forerunners were in the I'm better than you, Dad moment. That's pretty much what the Forerunners decided to do, and it more or
Yeah.
less did work for a very long period of time. We're like roughly like 10 million years away from what would be the origin of the flood of like we kind of understand it,
Okay,
and
so they did a little
trust
bit.
me, dog, it only goes downhill from here. The
They were able
main
to hold it
things that
together
you
for a
gotta
little bit.
understand from this is that the Forerunners defeated the Precursors. The Precursors decided, you know what, we're gonna leave the Milky Way Galaxy, turn ourselves into space dust, and we are gonna send ourselves out of here, and maybe we're gonna come back later on. I believe, and this is where we get into theory crafting, I believe the Precursors, again, sent themselves to the galaxy of origin and probably thought the Forerunners were going to wipe themselves out eventually, and they kind of pull a Necrons from Warhammer, and they just thought that everything was going to be okay when they came back, only to find out it doesn't really work that way. And this is where things go downhill, like really downhill.
Ah, now it's time for humanity to mess up. Good.
Skip ahead
Everyone's got
10
to at least mess
million
up
years, the
once.
Forerunners have completely dominated all of the known galaxy with technology that is so advanced that it doesn't rival anything else in the galaxy. It just straight up demolished pretty much everything else in the galaxy. The only other alien civilization that is near the level of the Forerunners is, again, ancient humanity. Ancient humanity kind of has their own territory where they started to colonize, and ancient humanity, under these terms, is basically, it's the idea of, yes, 100,000 years, I believe it's like 107,000 years before the start of Halo, ancient humans were more advanced than we were during the events of Halo, and they were coexisting with the Forerunners and having their own civilization with an alien species that would go on to be known as the Prophets within the Covenant. So the Prophets literally are just the backstabbing like rats, bro. They are literally the Judas of the entirety of us, bro. Like low key, they were buddy with us when we had the upper hand, and then all of a sudden, dude, later on, they have the Covenant. They have Mandicant bias, a portion of him, and then they decide to take us out. I'm going ahead a lot, and I am admittedly joking with a lot of that and like oversimplifying the lore when it comes to that, but. It
So
is
you kinda
funny,
lost me there for a
again,
second.
how much this does repeat. So humanity has their own little golden age when it comes to galaxy domination and their golden age of inheriting that wealth. That is until at the edge of the known galaxy, they run into a precursor ship. And this precursor ship is absolutely filled to the brim with powder. like a poor little Florida boy walking up on a traveler plane in the 1970s, finding out all of this powder. They are about to get hit with an unholy amount of
Damn it, I
repercussions
can't
by
remember the
finding
name of that story.
And then they proceed to examine this precursor powder. This
There's,
precursor
as far as I know, there's still finding bags of cocaine in that national forest whenever he just dumped everything or they're flying over.
powder, it seems to be made up of inert molecules that basically is useless. Like, there is no use for this stuff at all. Except for one. It has a CBD-like effect to their space dogs, otherwise known as the Faru. These weird vegan dog creatures.
Those look cool. What are
That
you talking about?
when they ingest the precursor powder, it is said to have a good psychological effect on them, and they grow these really cool patches in their fur that makes them more valuable on the black market. Yes, I'm not kidding. Part of the origin of the flood has to do
With dog customization?
ancient vegan dogs that the prophets and humanity enjoyed trading. So they proceeded to feed this powder to the space dogs for the next couple of
That's kinda
centuries
dumb.
and then breed them together to get cooler and cooler space dogs. Basically, there's no basically about it. That's literally what happened. And then things started to go bad. Centuries after they started doing this, and again, humanity's inheriting the golden age of basically being super advanced at the time, these dogs known as the Faru finally started showing off some weird signs. Where they used to be very, like, euphoric, having a really good time, they're just a good time boy. They started doing this weird thing, and consuming the weird precursor patches that were on the fur of other dogs. And again, this was really weird because these animals were herbivores. And then it got way worse. They proceeded to start to straight up eating their other dogs whole. They would just consume any other dog that had these patches on them whole. And this is where it gets into another piece of theory crafting. I think that the powder that the precursor powder was meant to be inert until a certain amount of time has passed, and then they were going to turn into their normal precursor rate. And maybe it was cosmic radiation through the millions of years that basically caused these things to be inert. But after being introduced into a biological organism, and these biological organisms were bred together over and over and over again, between inbreeding and basically turning these Faru into pugs, and them consuming each other, then introducing a level of what could be a prion disease or a mad cow disease of them.
I was literally just about to say that, we're like, there's tribes in Africa that are known for eating their dead, and they're known for getting prions in their brain because they eat the whole body. They eat the brain, which is that's where prions are at, and it just keeps passing on. And they wonder why they keep dying. That's they don't know. They're not educated in that sense. They are, again, it's a tribe. It's also going to cause mutations. So there's prion mix-up, genetic mutation, and then also a low genetic diversity, which is causing the genetic mutation. And also the inert thing, like after a certain amount of time, that's why it took so long. I like that theory. That's a good theory.
Basically
Go, what do you
going to
think?
cannibalism. Then that activated, that caused a little bit of a spark that later went on to start a proto, flood type of outbreak. At this point, it got very bad very, very quickly, but the humanity didn't really want to believe it. Their reasoning for why this was happening is, I'm not kidding, they thought, bro, I think we just inbred the dogs too much. I think we inbred them too much. Are you kidding me? Dog, the Faru, your vegan dogs, are consuming other dogs whole, growing sprouts out of their back.
That's a little bit more than genetic mutation.
Precursor.
Extra leg, extra eye, missing a leg, extra organs, double-headed dog. I could see that. Then again, these are aliens. I don't know what their mutations are going to be. I would hope to be somewhat similar to how most organic life works on Earth. Yeah, them getting tendrils and consuming other dogs, and specifically going for the patches that are formed after consuming the dust. How did this not raise suspicion a little bit sooner?
Alien god powder And you think, oh yeah, dog, no, no, no. We just inbred him a little bit too much, dog. It's kind of like when a French bulldog can't breathe. You know, some dogs can't breathe, some dogs have joint pain, some dogs eat other dogs whole. Dog, I'm sorry. This is where I start blaming ancient humanity. Ancient humanity, the forerunners, and the precursor all got their role to play. The forerunners were just being a little petty biatch and decided to take out Sky Daddy. Sky Daddy should have taken out their firstborn son, that being the forerunners, like that. And forerunners, and humanity should not have fed the unholy god space powder to their dogs and breed them into basically cannibal pugs. Now this is where we get into the first flood ancient human outbreak. Sorry, Ethan here. I forgot to put this in this set part of the video. Ancient humanity didn't just discover precursor powder. They also ran into a living, at this point, was the last living member of the precursor race that we know of, known as the primordial. And the primordial was living in a time...
I get this. No, it's probably not AI. I was going to say, that doesn't look like the precursors we saw before. That looks really cool. I'm going to go back and look at that again. They have like a crab design, just a little bit. The other one had like a jellyfish kind of design, just similarity. I know they can change their shape depending on how they need it to be or how they want it to be. That's cool.
Race that we know of, known as the primordial. And the primordial was living in a time stasis chamber where, although it has been around 10 million years since the forerunner precursor conflict, he has basically just been vibing there until he was woken up by ancient humanity, where then he was brought back to what would be the humans' capital city. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because this is going to be a really, really big deal later on in the timeline.
Finally into the flood. Well, proto-flood.
You remember those space dogs, the Faru? Yeah, those things that we bred together to make what was essentially space inbred vegan pugs that then went on to become ungodly abominations. Yeah. The proto-flood at this time ended up making the jump to ancient humans, and although it wasn't as good as affecting people as it is in the current way that we understand the flood within the Halo games, it was pretty good at infecting people. The best comparison that I can make is in Warhammer 40k, you have the Tyranids and you have the Gene Stealer cults. The Gene Stealer cults have a completely different way of assimilating biomass, and basically, bro, they go diddy with it, bro. They try to get with like a human, like whether it's a human baddie or just a human in general, and they proceed to swap genes with each other and then create another generation within the Gene Stealer cult, and then that Gene Stealer cult goes on to destabilize a human world that then prepares it for a Tyranid invasion.
Oh.
Now, let's go to the Flood's equivalent of this, and basically, they remove the entire pouring the Bizquick component of it for eating each other. Yes, that is one of the most known ways that they would infect other people, by consuming. Basically, this was your normal zombie virus. That essentially is what this was. Human world after human world was falling over and over and over again.
Taking over that fast.
And you remember that
it's like a normal zombie virus
that I was telling you about? Yeah.
If it's like a normal zombie virus, which it obviously isn't, if it's taking down worlds, shouldn't have lasted that long. Also, with all the technology they have, just glass the world, nuke the world.
Yeah, there were entire planets that had this space powder on it that was just waiting for the spark to get ignited, because again, it was centuries after it was discovered that, oh my goodness, these planets actually have remnants of, oh my gosh, bro, we're cooked. At this point, ancient humanity was going world to world. Worlds were falling after over and over and over again. They were basically planet hopping, and they realized that the only way that they can contain the flood is by going scorched earth, glass these planets, quarantine everything, destroy anything that even remotely resembles a flood outbreak. This ended up pushing them into what would be Forerunner space.
I mean, I am a human. I guess I think like the ancient humans do. Actually, I feel like that'd just be the obvious course of action. Get rid of it. Incinerate it. That's safest bet.
And the Forerunners at this time They were doing the Conor McGregor stroll, bro. They knew that they dominated just about everything, and they heard rumors of a human
Guys, they're
flood
cocky
outbreak, but they
bastards.
had no clue that it went all the way back to that time that they rebelled against Space Daddy. So they come into Forerunner space, and at this point, this is an act of war. Okay, this is a complete and utter act of war, but it gets even worse because they misjudged what humanity was doing in glassing these planets that were then Forerunner planets as them doing a containment and quarantine procedure, as you guys are committing a hilarious amount of war crimes. Like an absolutely hilarious amount of war crimes, dog. Okay, so we're gonna have to step in at this point. And it's at this point that humanity was actually doing really well against the flood and was actually pushing them back. And this is where there's a little bit of a weirdness within, like, the flood and when it comes to ancient humanity.
It sounds like they obviously do, but it sounds like the Forerunners just want to have beef with us just because we're a different species. Sounds like they have a superiority thing, even though they did trade with us at one point and stuff like that. But, well, no, they wanted to take it away from the precursors. The Forerunners did, so no, I guess that makes sense with them having a superiority issue.
There's a theory that ancient humans were actually, like, able to construct a pseudo cure against the flood. However, this is, like, heavily disputed that they were able to do it. However, it would be an explanation of why the flood left the Milky Way Galaxy for a time. I know I've been saying over and over again that the precursors aren't from the Milky Way Galaxy, and the reason I keep hammering that point home is because I believe the flood left the Milky Way Galaxy because they realized that ancient humanity and the Forerunners together could team up and then take out the flood. So the flood decided, you know what, we're going to leave the Milky Way Galaxy. We are going to come up with a better way of infecting you guys, becoming the flood that we understand today. And we are going to let ancient humanity and the Forerunners basically squabble with each other. And the loser of that is and the winner of that is who we're going to be taking on. And y'all are going to lose because you guys are going to try to take us on one-on-one. So the flood ends up leaving the Milky Way Galaxy for a time. Ancient humanity is questioned by the...
How? How do they leave? Unless he oversimplified that it's basically like a normal zombie thing. Did they keep their intelligence and were able to use spacecraft? That'd be the only way to explain this, and how they were going from planet to planet unless somehow someone got infected, stayed dormant till they got to the planet, and then showed infection symptoms. Hmm.
Forerunners of, hey, did you find a cure to this? They're like, no, we don't know where the flood went, like, at all. And the Forerunners were so peeved that ancient humanity, who, bear in mind, they still don't like because they were ultimately going to get passed up for the mantle of responsibility by them way back in the day, and that's what caused this entire problem to begin with. And then they were sent back to the Stone Age as a punishment for their war crimes. Yes, the Forerunners did kind of do a cue from old tomorrows on ancient humanity by sending them back to what was basically their homeworld, which would later be known as Earth, and sent them back to the Stone Age in that way. Okay, there's a few other characters. You have the librarian that comes into play later on. You have the Didact, which I'll bring up the Didact a little bit, but, like, basically, that's all you gotta understand. The Didact hated humanity because of all of the destruction and civilian casualties that they had in the Forerunner human war. So he always kind of had a grudge against ancient humanity, and that's not gonna come into play until something that happens later on in the timeline. But that is something that I do want you to bear in mind. So at this point in the whole pre-Halo timeline, the flood left the Milky Way Galaxy. The Forerunners sent humanity back to the Stone Age. And one other thing that I'm gonna bring up that I really wish that I brought up, and I might shoehorn this into a segment earlier on in the video, is that ancient humanity didn't just find precursor powder. They also found a living precursor known as the Primordial in a time stasis chamber at the end of the known galaxy. That's going to come into play very, very shortly.
Did he just repeat? Yeah, he did. Okay, I forgot. He said he jumped ahead of some certain things.
9,000 years after the Forerunners sent the entirety of humanity back to the Stone Age, this is when the Flood first started reappearing. The Flood started reappearing on the edge of known Forerunner space, and at this point, the Forerunners didn't really take the Flood seriously. Because I need you to understand this. This is 9,000 years after the human Forerunner War, and they thought that humanity either completely made up the Flood as a threat in order to justify destroying Forerunner planets, or they thought they were vastly overstating how terrifying and difficult to control this outbreak was. At this point, the Flood had 9,000 years to basically grind XP before they came back to take on the Forerunners, and when they did, bro, it low-key paid off. At this point, this is what the modern Flood was. This is the Flood as we understand it within modern Halo, and they were smoking like a mix some between planets. But to give the...
It's all organic, but that looked like a fungus mixed with a normal organic. Like just a mammal. Maybe a mammal. Maybe a reptile. Whatever. It looks like it's mixing kingdoms.
Forerunners some credit. Their technology did help contain the Flood for a time. They didn't really take them seriously up until they started taking more and more planets, and the rate that the Flood was adapting to the Forerunners was outpacing what the Forerunners were adapting to the Flood. At this point, you remember that last precursor that I brought up early on in the video? You see, that guy, the Primordial, was still on the home planet of what was ancient humanity. The Forerunners ended up going over to that, grabbing him in his time stasis chamber, where they put mendicant bias to interrogate him for 43 straight years, because they thought, okay, these things come from the precursors. We know that. We're going to interrogate the last known precursor for any way to either cure it or absolutely demolish it. And for 43 years, mendicant bias was talking with the Primordial. And the Primordial got mendicant bias to switch up. This is the first and most famous time the logic plague has ever come in. The logic plague basically is that the Flood not only can assimilate biomass and use it in any way that it sees fit of infecting and assimilating the entirety of the galaxy, it also has the ability to corrupt AIs. Not just that, another ability that it has from the Primordial, because spoiler alert, the Primordial merges with a Gravemind, and that becomes the backbone of consciousness of the Gravemind that we later meet inside of the Halo games. Like fun fact, I'm not even kidding. The Primordial ends up being the...
So it's like, okay, so the Flood is, which granted, it's the precursors, powderized, and it has like basically all their abilities, but none of the knowledge on how to use said ability. What if the Flood's not an infection and the precursors reset themselves? Like they reset their memories and everything, like everything they learned. And they kept their technology because they knew they could advance back to it if they stayed there and knew how to learn it. Like just stay in that area of the technology and then I don't know what they would even call powder back to the living organism. They do that, and then they learn everything again. What if the Flood is just that without a conscience? And then once they combined with one of the original precursors, they said it basically gives the hive mind an upgrade. It's giving the hive mind access to, not access, the knowledge of how to control the precursor's abilities, giving them more control.
Backbone consciousness of the entirety of the Gravemind, because again, it is the last remaining precursor that we know of. And this is where the Flood gets some absolutely insane abilities, where it can corrupt AIs by literally out-logicking them. And the best way that I've heard this described is, look at an AI as just an endless pool of, not an endless pool, but a bucket of information. It's a bucket of information that is put in by any being that is creating that, okay? And it uses that bucket of information to piece things together in order to solve a problem. And that's how you got mendicant bias. And mendicant bias is the biggest and most powerful AI that the Forerunners ever created. Now let's look at the Gravemind. The Gravemind is,
that image.
Think of a bucket as the mendicant bias. The Gravemind is an ocean of souls, memories, everything. where it can literally just outlogic any AI because it has more information than any AI is. It can convince any AI that has a lesser intelligence than they do, and it does because this thing has more, basically, like, it has more
Processing power.
information to
So
pull from than any AI ever created because it is a hive mind. And by doing this, it effectively was able to turn mendicant bias against the ancient forerunners, where now the Flood had not only access
it's
to
so
all
weird,
of
but
the
I get
knowledge
it.
of the
It does make
military of the
sense the way you explained
forerunners,
it.
it also had the knowledge to take forerunner ships and use that against the forerunners. So now they have space travel. Now they have military tactics. Now they can use weapons. And
Okay, he's saying now. So it's me that didn't have space travel before. Okay, I'm kind of losing how, unless they can travel in space just naturally without having any kind of ship, which I guess if they can change their shape and adapt to what they need to be in, it possibly could. Mm, maybe, possibly. That's how they did it. I don't know. I'm
now they
still
have the
confused in some of the
mind of
details.
a primordial. And this another thing that they have, to call it back to Warhammer. They also have the ability to disrupt space travel. This one, I'm gonna be real here, still doesn't really make that much sense to me. But in the beginning of the video, they had something called neurophysics, and basically through thought they could manipulate the known galaxy. And one of the ways that they are able to do that is that their consciousness is so powerful that they can warp, like not time travel, but warp space travel. Kind of like a psyker from Warhammer 40k. If you understand how that works, that's basically how this works. The Tyranids have a very similar ability to this. Fun fact. If you go over to Warhammer, there's a lot of.
So they're forming wormholes? Well, no, it sounds like they're doing. Yeah, okay. So they're doing one of the two. For them to speed up their travel, they can form a wormhole to grab 2 points and shorten the space, or they could do the opposite. They could, if they can sense where space time is at, they can also sense movement in it. That would be the space travel he's talking about. So while they sense something traveling in this area, no, in this little area, try to make sure it's in camera. uh, they can make the distance longer while keeping the item here. Because I don't think they can move this item. They can only move the 2 points in space. Maybe that's what I understand from that. Because I don't understand how the psychers work. Not exactly. I've only played one Warhammer game. Loved it. One of my favorite games I played. Warhammer 40k, Space Marines 2.
Similarities here. At this point, the Forerunners are like, ah, how? No! No! Like, dude,
There's shit in the bed?
Like, dude, that has gotta be one of the funniest, dude, we're so cooked moments ever. The Flood has taken planet after planet, and it is going bad. It's getting to a point that they're like, yo, do we have any ideas? Do we have any ideas here? And then you had a few other ideas come over. The main idea that the Forerunners came up with was, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make this weapon called the Halo Array. And the Halo Array is going to be the thing.
All right, there's not solar panels there, but that looks like a part of a Dyson sphere. Or at least a ring of a Dyson sphere. But it looks like they're. Oh, they put Elysium. That's what I'm thinking of. They did something similar in that movie where like there's a space station that has its own gravity because it's spinning, and then it has. I just don't understand how they got the continental looking stuff on there. Then again, this is technology that basically replicates magic. So
that destroys all conscious life or any life that can be assimilated in the biomass. Okay? To quote Cortana inside of Halo, it doesn't target.
how much energy is that motherfucker consumed to do that? To eradicate all organic life? I'm guessing it's from planet to planet. It would okay, so it has to be part of a Dyson. It probably sits around the sun to gain its energy to go back to different planets and do that. If I had to guess.
The Flood only. It targets their food. That's basically what they decided to do. They couldn't beat the Flood like directly, so they decided this is what we're going to do. We're going to take out the Flood indirectly by taking out their food source, and then they will eventually starve out. And basically
Could
the,
they just
the
adapt
most
that?
simple way that I can describe like how Halo does this is it doesn't target the body, it targets the nervous system. That basically is like, hey, if it's conscious life and it has thought, go in, absolutely just like destroy that, turn it in Thanos, snap that away. Okay, that is basically what it does. Everything from ancient forerunners to tadpoles, get them out of here. And then you had the Didact. The Didact had this other thing called the Composer, and the Composer was basically like, this is what it's going to do. It's going to turn any organic life into data, and then we're going to put that data inside of machines. So literally the Necrons. Again, I'm not kidding. Brother, if you had a nickel for every single time that Halo lore and Warhammer War was pretty similar, the Didact would be on there, okay? The Didact came in with the Composer and beta tested it on Ancient Humanity, and Ancient Humanity got turned into what would later be known as the Promethean Knights inside of Halo 4. And
What
yes,
the fuck?
the Didact is the main, like I'm getting a lot of you guys caught up on all of that. The Forerunners were absolutely horrified by this, and the Didact tested it out on Ancient Humanity because he was still very angry at Ancient Humanity for the damage that was caused during the Forerunner Human War. That he went out of his way to say, and you know what? Then we're going to test the weapon.
So the Forerunners live for a long time. I'm not gonna pretend to act like I know how their brains work or their society works. How are you mad for 9,000 years? I don't get that. You've already set them back. You have eradicated any memory of what they used to be and have reset them to caveman. That is not the humans you were mad at anymore. That is the race. You're mad at the race, you racist piece of shit.
On you. And then after all of that, the Forerunners were like, "Yeah, dude, you're insane. We're gonna put you in a stasis chamber on a on a planet that will survive the Halo array, and we're just gonna forget that you. We're basically gonna put you in the Phantom Zone. Is basically what it is. I'm not gonna talk about the Didact anymore in here, but the Composer is kind of a valid way of combating it if it wasn't for the Logic Plague. The Logic Plague is ultimately why I believe they came in and were like, no, we're not gonna do that. Also, AI crins. I bet that's another reason why they said it too. There's probably one dude in the back was like, "Yo, that's like a really good idea, but like mendicant bias got folded by the flood, bro." So no. They also made another thing called offensive bias, which was mendicant bias, but without all of like the creative thinking. They basically made an AI that was like extra like, and guess what? You gonna die today, boss. That's essentially what offensive bias was, but I'm not gonna bring him up a ton. After the Halo array was insisted upon, they built the Halo array and then they fired it, and that destroyed all conscious life in the known galaxy and rendered mendicant bias without the...
I was wrong. It's not from planet to planet. Were they using precursor dust? I know it says it's inert molecules, but something has to power that. And one sun is not going to be able to power it to eradicate everything in the Milky Way. Not going to happen.
Flood in order of a fleet, and then they basically were like, now we're going to take offensive bias, sick 'em, boy, and that's essentially what happened. Now, this is where we get into the post-Halo array. After they were able to confirm that the flood was eradicated after a certain amount of time, that is when they sent in these automated ships powered by like automated systems or AI, and sent them to seed all of these like ancient alien worlds with life that would later go on to be the Grunts, the Sangheili, the Prophets, Ancient Humanity. All of them except for the Forerunners. The Forerunners felt so guilty that they low-key caused all of this that they were like, and we're just not gonna allow ourselves to come back. Like, you know what?
Yay, the teenagers finally went through puberty and realized, oh, I'm an asshole.
Is gonna go to Ancient Humanity, which is again gonna cause the Human Covenant War, which is a whole other thing that I'm not gonna cover. I'm just gonna cover the Flood Dog. I ain't doing all that. But basically, a lot of these planets had Forerunner tech on it, and one of those was the race that later went on to be known as the Prophets. That's why the Prophets basically got a huge head start on any of the other. Man, it actually is a lot like Ultramara's. Like, a lot like Ultramara. Like, the more I think about it, the more like, Halo lore low-key was inspired by Warhammer and Ultramara's the more that I think about it. I'm not even gonna lie to you, Doug. And then after that, that is how we get into the modern era of the Flood.
The actual meat and potatoes.
The modern Flood basically survived on these on the Halo array, all of these other Forerunner research facilities, because even now they're still trying to figure out a way to study and take out the Flood. And basically all of this has come up inclusive. They can't find a cure to this whatsoever, but they still are keeping them contained in the hopes that eventually ancient humanity will take up the mantle of responsibility. And
there wouldn't be a cure if it's coming from another. I know it says from another Mount Milky Way, but they're like their consciousness sounds like it's on a different dimensional plane, and that's what's controlling all of this. You had to figure out a way to sever that consciousness, and the only way to do that in the whole universe, there isn't a way to do that. You had to rewrite how dimensional physics work, which I'm not going to pretend like I know how that works. I'm just saying, like, theoretically, you would have to rewrite those.
To finally figure out how to take out the Flood threat once and for all, in keeping the Halo array alive as a way of life. And if you can't, just do what we did. Hopefully no alien species completely misinterprets that thing as like literal like galaxy saving instructions and into a galaxy religion where they think humanity is like the scourge. In reality, they are the harbingers and the ones to reclaim the mantle of responsibility, and starts a war between the Covenant and ancient humanity that is basically a huge misunderstanding. Hopefully that
it sounds like all
happen.
This was a huge misunderstanding.
But basically, the Flood managed to survive because it was in hopes that, listen, we just want you guys to come up with a permanent solution in taking out the Flood. And I actually want to throw in this bit right here before I get into like the different Flood forms and all of that stuff, but after I gave you the whole lore breakdown. You remember how I said earlier on in the video that the Precursor's big goal was to maintain and make sure that like conscious alien life managed to stay alive forever. And the mantle of responsibility was basically to ensure that that always happened. I like to think that the Flood actually is achieving that goal. Like, I want you to think about it. Like, what is the Flood but not a hive mind superintelligence? The Precursors didn't necessarily say that you have to have free will. No. They just wanted life to exist and exist forever. What other creation ensures that more than the Flood?
I called it.
The Flood is super adaptable. It is nothing else but living. There's no free will here, but it is the ultimate, like, conglomeration, the ultimate assimilation of all things that are alive. It doesn't matter what your species is. It doesn't matter what your faction is. It takes in all intelligence and brings it all into one. From your primordial precursor to your forerunners to your ancient humanity, it brings them all together without class or anything, and creates life. Like, I like to think that, like, it does achieve the goal of the Precursors, but ultimately, the Precursors' answer to their own mantle of responsibility is ultimately flawed, because what is life without free will? Like, I like to think that that is what the, like, why the Precursors ended up being like, you know what? We're gonna do the
He put that a lot more eloquently than I did.
Flood. We're gonna do the most extreme example. Okay, you guys want to take up the mantle of responsibility and ensuring life exists throughout the galaxy? Okay, we're gonna show you the most bastardized version of life that there can possibly be. And now you guys are gonna have to deal with that. And I like to think that that was always kind of part of the plan. And if it wasn't, it was just the bastardization of that plan. I'm sorry I'm geeking out on it, but that's such a, like, understand
that is really cool. I do like
part
that.
of the Flood lore easily is the fact that they fed it to some vegan dogs called the Faru.
Yeah, that's
the weakest portion of the entire bit. The coolest portion
that part is still kind
is the fact that the Flood inadvertently does handle the mantle of responsibility because it does guarantee the existence of life throughout the galaxy. And the only way that the Forerunners, the only way that the Forerunners were.
I know this is Mike Slates. I wonder if them coming back now is more of it's just a baby precursor, and then they had the last one left alive, be assimilated, and he said it was a backbone for the hive mind, but it's like Space Daddy, as he said, Space Daddy trying to help out the hive mind.
We're able to guarantee like the existence of like life with free will is by taking out all conscious life. So like in a weird way, it's like cosmic punishment to the Forerunners because the precursors were like, okay, you want the mantle of responsibility? Okay, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna force you to take out all conscious life in the galaxy in order to take us out. That's so cool. That's so cool. I'm sorry I'm glazing it. That's such a cool piece of lore in there.
Yeah, that sounds like Old Testament God
That's
talking too.
Really cool.
Ooh, actually the types. And I want to see like there's levels of progression for the infection.
Lore breakdown on the Halo flood. Now I can get into some of the infection forms. Okay, you got your first form, which is essentially them in like air particles. This is you're still like you're very at the absolute most basic way how they can infect you, and they can infect you through either inhaling them
like
through flood spores or infecting different cuts on your body. Fun fact, one of the very few people
like
within the entirety of Halo that is weirdly immune to getting infected by these spores is the Arbiter. Again, like, forgive me if I'm wrong. Maybe that part of Halo lore I'm not good at. That's never explained, like, at all, that the Arbiter can, like, you can infect him with Halo flood spores. That's like a very major thing. Like, brother, Master Chief would get infected by those things. Master Chief would get infected by those spores if he ever took his helmet off. The Arbiter just breathes that in like it's absolutely nothing, bro. Not even a cough. Not a thing. He's him. Okay, but this is
crackpot theory. The Arbiters were, again, because they said the Forerunners sent out everyone, and the Arbiters one of those species technically created, kind of seeding life on that planet. What if they did some testing with some of the leftover precursor powder and tried to combine it into them? If I'm not mistaken, they looked like they had like a scale effect on their body.
Like air molecules, multi-celled like entities, and they can infect you through cuts, through you breathe in a little bit too much, and this is where you get in a few of your other forms, infection forms. You remember those little popcorn guys? Yeah, those guys. Okay, there's another one. They're like tadpole versions of this. You don't really see them a lot in Halo because we don't do a lot of stuff underwater in Halo. But you see these in Halo 2 when you play as the Arbiter. You see them all swimming around. Yes, they can become a water version of that where they can infect creatures that are underwater, which I don't know who thought that, oh yeah, bro, what if we just live underwater? Maybe we'll be safe from the flood. Brother, what are you talking about? Of course that they can adapt to underwater.
That'd be even worse. Yes, let me go from a land-faring species into the water where I'm at a disadvantage, and everything else has an advantage on me. Even the smallest of fish can swim faster than I can. Let's go down there, and we know the flood can infect all sentient life. Let's let it infect those fish, make them swim even faster, because it's definitely going to enhance them, or make them bigger and have more teeth. Well, obviously, that thing doesn't look... Then it is aliens. I don't know what that one's based off of. He said like tadpole-based things, but that don't look like a tadpole to me. Yeah, so let's go in the water. Let's go in the water. I agree, that's very dumb.
With how crazy they can get? You thought that was gonna save you? Okay, this is where these things jump on you and convert every part of your body into something that will be used to infect even more people. But this is something I need to bring up when it comes to infection forms.
Get turned into a soup.
Infection forms have this ability because when you go back to the precursors, remember how I said at the beginning of the video, the precursors had the ability to shapeshift? Yeah, the ability that the Flood has to convert biomass into anything that they see fit in order to infect even more people, comes from this latent ability, and it
Yeah,
is something that
kind of
they
figured.
have from all the way back then. Again, it's an ability that was used to create life that now has been bastardized as a thing used to assimilate life. Combat forms. You see, if infection forms aren't getting it done, they're gonna create combat forms meant to subdue anything that can even slightly fight off these things. Combat forms are going to, they're infection
Is
forms
it?
that jump onto a host.
Oh, so the arbors aren't completely immune because that's an arbor. I can tell by the feet, and I think I think that's supposed to be its head right there that's been pushed down. Huh. Also, I get the flood, hive mind, whatever. I don't see how those tendril. Well, I guess it just goes straight. Unless those go straight through that armor, I don't see how this is an advantage over keeping the original body and just enhancing the muscles.
Convert them into something that is then going to absolutely body everything else around it. Although they maybe are not the toughest thing, they are going to be even tougher with more numbers. If you do not absolutely destroy every single part of the biomass that was used to make that combat form, it is then going to get reassimilated by an infection form, and you're going to have to face them over and over again.
And
This
probably
is your
bigger and
basic foot
stronger.
soldier of the flood. Abilities that
And also with being hive mind, however, whatever way you killed it, the other ones are going to learn to avoid that. That sounds weird. I guess avoid the weapon, or whatever you used to kill them, or they're going to learn to disarm you faster, stay from range. Just remember how the Terminids do. Like, you kill certain Terminids, their memories are sent back. They send in new drones, and those drones have all the knowledge they need to get around whatever killed the last infantry people.
they have is because
I
they
don't
are
remember if all
taking
of them have that
on
ability,
the
though.
body, not just the body, but the mind of whatever host that they have taken. They can also use the weapons of said entity or host that they have taken, which gets into some of the more terrifying abilities of the Flood, that they aren't just like your standard zombie. They can use the weapons, technology, and tactics of anything that they assimilate. They just
Ah,
choose to be
kind of a given at this
animalistic.
point.
Like that's ultimately what they do. They are meant to be just an efficient, galaxy-spanning predator assimilator, and the combat forms are the ones doing the major, but like foot soldier version of that. Carrier forms. You see, let's say it assimilates something that isn't the best at fighting. Maybe it's you. Maybe you're a lover, not a fighter. So what's gonna happen to you? You see, an infection form is gonna jump on you, turn you into an
Bomb?
infection breeding factory. Yeah, dog,
Oh,
you
no,
should
like a
have wished
spore,
that you
walking
were a fighter,
spore
dog. You're
producer.
basically gonna be making babies with yourself forever. And to some of you gooners out there, maybe that sounds good. To me, absolutely not.
Mm.
You are then going to be used to make even more and more infection forms. And let's say your body gets destroyed, you're gonna blow up and then create more infection forms upon your passing.
That's partially right about the
But you
bomb.
are used as nothing more than a baby making factory for the Flood. That's essentially what you're used for. Fun fact: if a combat form is very damaged and can no longer be used as a combat form, it will be basically stitched together and used as a carrier form. So this is, again, the terrifying part of the Flood, is anything that could even slightly be used to progress the goal of the Flood to assimilate everything, it will. An infection form that takes a combat form. The combat form gets too destroyed to be a combat
And
form
it's
anymore.
strategically smart.
Okay, then it's
Because, as I said, those explode and send out those air particles, the spores. Can't kill them, infect them, that's its whole point, is to infect. And it starts off with infection, and then once it goes back to killing not working, it goes back to infecting, but in a different way. I like that. It's very strategically smart.
going to become a carrier form, and that will create more combat forms, and then we're going to go over and over and
Yeah.
over again till we get to the scarier versions of this. I'm going to blast through these next two really quick.
Cool.
They're called pure forms, and pure forms is like a big class of like different ones that they can be. This is how you get into your tanks, this is how you get into your stalkers, this is how you get into all of the other forms that the Flood can take, and that this is when the Flood starts taking out their inner Tyranid, and they they start adapting to anything else that they are facing. Let's say, for example, the Flood is having trouble against an enemy that is using like a flamethrower. They are then going to create a Flood form that has a form of fire resistance. Let's say they're taking on a Scorpion tank, and tanks are absolutely decimating them. They're going to assimilate enough biomass to create something that can take out said Scorpion tank. This is where they've assimilated so much biomass that they can effectively build their own troops depending on what they're facing, and anything that was working up to this point will no longer work. This is where I think the Forerunners during the Forerunner Flood War started like losing it, because now they're facing an enemy that is actively evolving and learning how to take on the best weapons that used to be used against them. Again, very similar to the Tyranids, although like less buggy and more body horror. Think less insect and more Cronenberg. That's effectively what these are. And then the next couple of ones is where we get into like, but it's like, this is where we're going Dead Space, boy.
Like a Cronenberg mix between, I guess it's precursor. If there was a form of they did eventually verge off. It's like if the very first form of life where there's a single cell before they split off into plants, fungi, and then mammals or animals. Like the first cell of that became a multicellular organism and kept all three traits of them. That's what that kind of reminds me of.
Your grave mines. Now, a grave mine starts with a proto-grave mine. We see our first version of a proto-grave mine in Halo 1 with keys being assimilated into it. And is one of the most terrifying ways to illustrate the Flood's abilities, where it not just uses your body, it uses your soul. Every memory that you have, every emotion that you've ever felt, everything that you've ever felt now belongs to the grave mind. It is the last bit of desperation that you have, to where every part of your being that you thought was you no longer is you anymore. It is now theirs, bro. Like I've been trying to sow clips throughout this video to like really hammer home like how scary the Flood can get. And the inspiration for this is when you see keys inside of Halo Campaign Evolved, the way that they film that, the way that they like remastered that is so good that you can't like help but like, yeah, dog, we are cooked. We are cooked, bro. And it's the horror of the Flood that like we like, I understand a lot of people bring it up, but we gloss past. Your mind is still conscious. Your mind is still of use. You want yourself to lose consciousness. You want it to be like a zombie virus where you're gone. Everything part of you is gone. But the Flood doesn't waste anything. Every bit of knowledge, every bit of emotion, every bit of suffering is used as a way of assimilating and destroying everything that they possibly can. Like, I think this is the most terrifying aspect of it.
That sounds
is the
like
idea
hell.
that you would be a part of the grave mind, and you would not just witness, but you would also commit every atrocity that was ever done to you. That's the scariest portion of the grave mind. Imagine getting assimilated and also assimilating all of your loved ones and feeling the terror that you inflicted on them. That is terrifying. From proto-grave mind to grave mind, this is where we have like a centralized and
I don't even think Alt F4ing would help you there either. Because I have a sneaky suspicion it's just gonna bring you back. Because you don't instantly lose everything whenever you do something like that, not unless you do it a certain way. But I just feel like it'd bring you back. And that would be awful too, because you're probably gonna have some. I don't know what to think about that. I can only imagine, because you're probably borderline immortal, connected to that hive mind. And as you said, it's like there's one big central brain, and then there's like itty bitty little cells all over the body, but all those are brains, and it's all the sentient life that's consumed. And they can still feel everything that brain feels, and that brain is non-empathetic at all, or cares for anything other than growing.
Intelligence. This is where these things start becoming like riddle masters. They start saying some crazy aura farming lines like, "What are you? I'm a monument to all of your sins." Oh, that's such a good line. That's such a good line. for a ancient grave mind zombie entity to say, I will glaze that to the end of my days.
It is, but it
that
depends
is
on who's
not
directed
the
towards.
end of the flood. Not nearly. Because from grave mind you get into a key mind, and a key mind is basically if I took a grave mind and I just pumped that thing full of every PD on the book, and now it's not just controlling a planet, it's controlling entire campaigns. It is now like fundamentally a super grave mind, and from super grave mind you go into a planetary flood level threat. A planetary flood is in the name. It is assimilated every bit of biomass on a planet, turning it into what is basically a brethren moon from Dead Space.
Dead Space reference, been talking about the whole time.
Brother, no. Fire the Halo array. It put us. I'm sorry, dog, okay?
Yeah,
we
fire
need to put a switch on the Halo
it's
array
been
and just go.
powered, but fire it.
Done. Done. Make sure nothing coming back. Nothing coming back, my man. Absolutely not. So where is the flood now? After the events of Halo 3, they basically were able to take.
Okay, hold on. I just put two and two together. So that's what the Halo Ray is doing. He talked about it like messing up their nervous system, and this is again playing with pseudoscience. That would probably be disconnecting like their higher dimensional thinking from the body they're controlling. Because they start off of powder, there's no brain. That thought's coming from something. It's not the powder. It's just being put through the powder, which is not powder anymore. It's a cell. I get that. Whatever. As it's evolved. Interesting. So that proved my theory. I think that proved my theory right, partially.
Care of the last grave mine that we know of within the lore of Halo. But that is not the end of the flood, because there's been flood that's been found on what was High Charity. That is how the flood was able to get into Halo Wars 2. And we also have that blatant setup for the flood left the galaxy, and I imagine there is flood outside of the Milky Way Galaxy because that is where the precursors originated from. And I wouldn't be surprised if the flood eventually does come back in a future Halo game, and they have learned how to take on not just the Forerunners, not just any other species, but now they are coming with a vengeance against us. And now we're going to be taking on some Brethren Moon level threats, and we are once again going to be faced with the option of, do we use the Halo array once more? Or do we do something else? Do we eventually figure out how to cure the flood? Can you cure the flood? And how are we going to get past any of this if they ever decide to come back? And there you go. That is the Flood Explained video. If you enjoyed this, please consider a like, comment, and subscribe. If you want more explained videos like this, drop an entity, a monster, something cool, and I'll cover it in another explained video. Please consider a like, comment, and subscribe. We're trying to reach 350 in another explained video. Please consider a like, comment, and subscribe. We're trying to reach 350,000 subscribers before the end of the year. That is the goal. Thank you, everybody who makes this possible for me to do. It means the absolute most to me. And with all of that out of the way, I will see you all in the next video. Adios, guys.
Amazing Lord video. I didn't know the Halo flood was that dangerous. I knew, I know Necromorphs can be, and I knew the Tyranids were pretty bad. The flood's way worse. Way worse. Very good video, Ethan. Go check out his channel. Channel will be in the description. Go give him a like. Go comment something you want him to review. That'd be nice. I want to see more videos from him. And that about wraps it up. See you guys.